Read One Communication presents The Scholar's Chair. This program is brought to you in celebration of 1400 years of Islam's contribution to spiritual and intellectual development.
Revelation and Reason. Tonight, the Scholar's Chair will interview experts from three traditions: Judaism, Islam, and Objectivism. We welcome to the table Rabbi Steve Weissman from Temple Solel, Dr. Imad Deen Ahmad from the Minaret of Freedom Institute, and Robert Bidinato, editor of an award-winning magazine, The New Individualist. Welcome to the Scholar's Chair, gentlemen.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Before we get into our program, here is a point of view on the topic by Dr. Kareem Douglas Crowe.
Muslim individuals who are known to have a certain proclivity for uttering these type of statements. And the notion of intelligence or understanding features prominently in these. The study and analysis of this material is very important to understand the trajectories that unfolded out of the Quranic teaching, because the Quranic teaching was intermingled and supported by existing indigenous elements in the society among the Arabs. So aql, reason, intelligence, was contrasted with humq, stupidity, imbecile. How should you say it? Someone who's blockheaded, who doesn't draw lessons from experience, for example, who repeats his mistakes. Another antonym is jahl, folly, ignorance. So in the old Arab system, the aqil, the man who restrains himself and acts wisely, is contrasted with the jahil, who is like a barbarian who is full of aggressive and impetuous response. By the way, the term aql is unique to Arabic, and there is no cognate parallel in any other Northwest Semitic language. That's quite significant. Many common terms can be paralleled in Hebrew, Ethiopic, South Arabian, even Ugaritic and Babylonian, but not the term aql. And it comes from a object, concrete object, which is part of daily life among the old Arabs. They had a thick woolen cord which they used to hobble their camel. In the desert, you don't have many trees around to tie your camel. You lift one of the hind legs, you fold it at the knee, and you slip this doubled cord over the joint of the folded knee, and the camel is left standing on three legs, so it can graze for a few hundred meters in the vicinity where it's left, but it won't go away. So if you come back in several days, it'll still be there, right? That's how you tie your camel. You restrain it. So when they're not in use on the camel, that cord is folded twice and placed on top of the head to keep the head cloth in place. It's called al-iqal, hobbling cord. So the image is the beast is restrained. And so the folly and ignorance and barbaric reaction of the unreformed man is restrained. And that makes man wise or smart or intelligent. That's the core, concrete, semantic derivation of the term intelligence, reason in Islam.
Dr. Ahmed, what's your reaction to what we just saw Dr. Crowe say?
I thought it was very interesting. It emphasizes, by relating the concept of aql or reasoning to the hobbling of a beast, is a very excellent way of identifying the role that reason plays in the Islamic epistemology. It is not the whole of epistemology, but it is the restraining influence. It is the guide that allows you to check and make sure that those conclusions that you draw from experience or those that you acquire by transmission of knowledge from others is valid if it's restrained by reasoning.
Okay, very interesting. Robert, it was Ayn Rand who said, fundamentally, the means by which we live our lives as humans is reason. Do you agree, and why? And does this comply with revelation?
Well, objectivism has a somewhat different take on the role of reason and the role of and the meaning of revelation. As far as reason is concerned, our philosophy has a point of departure from the statement that was made, in that we don't see reason as a constraint or a restraint on humans so much as it is a proper channel for the flourishing of human activity, of human productive activity, creative activity, and intelligence. It is true that without reason, one's passions can go willy-nilly and create all kinds of destruction, but reason is seen as you might say, a fount of creative effort for human beings. And so it's a different perspective. With regard to revelation, reason in the objectivist philosophy is contrasted with revelation. Reason and revelation are considered in contrast because revelation is interpreted as trying to acquire a knowledge through means other than the senses, means that transcend the senses. And we believe in our own tradition of reason that knowledge is to be acquired through the rational method of the senses and then developed from there. So it's a point of departure.
Okay, and Rabbi, what's in Judaism, what's the relationship?
There's a tremendous development over time. I couldn't help thinking as I was listening to Dr. Ahmad and to Mr. Crow that we have a teaching from the 3rd century, from the collections of the writings of the great rabbis, that says, who is wise is the one who learns from everyone. But the next question that gets asked and answered is, who is a hero, who is strong? It's the one who's able to control their inner urges. And I've always wondered what led them to move from point A to point B, and I hear in that hobbling of the camel metaphor something very similar in terms of that there's a connection between wisdom and strength. And it's not the more wisdom you have, the stronger you are. It seems to me it would be the more wisdom that you have, the more you need to learn to control it and use it wisely, if you will. So I think it's there from the beginning. And it certainly evolves over time. I mean, we've seen Maimonides, who brings philosophy into the 13th century Jewish community, by way of Averroes, by way of Thomas Aquinas, and wrote all of his philosophical treatises in Arabic, never intending that the Jewish community would read them because he was also a great legal scholar. And after his death, for 100 years, the Jewish community argued to the point of armed battle over what he actually meant once the Arabic stuff was translated into Hebrew and they understood both sides of where the man was coming from. But here's this great teacher and leader who had both within him, and people just arguing for the soul of the man after his death.
Interesting.
There's something that about this analogy of reason to a hobble. I think that one has to understand it not in terms of a means of restraining human passions, although one certainly can look at reason that way, but rather as a way of restraining other sources of knowledge from going astray. You know, you're tying the camel not to prevent the camel from being mean, because the camel's probably still going to be mean, even though it's hobbled, but to keep it from going astray. Mm-hmm. And the way that we acquire a knowledge is, for example, through the senses. It is reason that puts a constraint on that sensual knowledge. When I see a body of water in front of me in the desert, it may be a lake or it may be a mirage. When someone comes and informs me of some information, he may be telling the truth, or he may be lying, or maybe he's not lying, maybe he's just a fool. I need to use my reason in order to evaluate the information that comes through me from other channels. And revelation is simply another example of transmitted knowledge. Just as a human being can come to me and say, you know, I had this experience the other day. I went to a part of the earth where the sun never sets. Should I believe him or should I not believe him? I can use my reason in order to evaluate that comment. But similarly, when someone tells me, I'm a prophet of God, and an angel told me such and such, do I just believe him blindly? Do I reject him blindly? Or do I use my reason to evaluate the information that has been given to me?
That's a fascinating point, because Judaism 2,000 years ago, at the time of Jesus, was going through this incredible upheaval that the Romans only helped along by the destruction of the temple and the changes that forced. The rabbis who took over after the temple was destroyed, who had this incredibly different view of what Judaism was and could be, took the old tradition of prophecy, and they didn't outlaw it, but it was clearly antithetical to the way they were approaching the world, which was more democratic and more rational. And they instead consigned it to women, children, and fools 2,000 years ago.
Huh, interesting. Rand advocates rational self-interest. That is, one's interests are not whatever one happens to feel like. Rather, it is by reason that one identifies what is one's interest and what isn't. Rabbi, is rational self-interest a reason-viable philosophy, and why?
I think so, but I'm not convinced that I've convinced myself yet. You know, I'm looking at this body of Jewish tradition, you know, and to hear a source like the Talmud say that prophecy is constrained to women, children, and fools just flies in the face of what I would expect reasonably. Mm-hmm. And it forces me to look and say, why would they say such a thing? And realize that there was a self-interest in doing so. So at the very core, in some of these basic assumptions, we needed over time to continue to evolve, to get away from the self-interest, you know, to make sure that what we were doing was something that was going to be viable for the ages. So I think you can start from a place of overly significant self-interest, you know, but the truly timeless teachings and messages, whether they come from the rational, whether they come from the irrational, are the ones that are going to be proven over time. And once you prove them over time, you get away from that self-interest.
I would say that, at least according to our philosophical position, that the rational is that which is drawn from experience. We don't make a dichotomy at all between reasoning and that information that we get through our experience in daily life. Wisdom to us is all part and parcel of the process of living and a process of applying reason to experience, to factual experience. So yes, when we say self-interest, we don't also segregate the notion of one's interest and one's legitimate interests from the process of life. Those things which objectively advance our lives, we need food, we need clothing, we need shelter. These things aren't arbitrary. These are things that enhance our lives and our well-being. And therefore, it is to our best interest to utilize reason as a policy of guiding our lives, where we would part company, or at least I would part company from our other guests, is probably on the issue of means beyond reason and the claims of knowledge that would emerge from those. And that's we believe that ultimately everything must stand the test of reason, just as Jefferson put it when he said that put even the existence of God to the test of reason, because reason is our only means of really objectively discriminating truth from falsehood in the final analysis. And these other claims simply have to be put to the test of reason and factual knowledge.
Dr. Ahmad, what's your reaction to what Robert just said?
Well, I think there's a distinction to be made between using reason as the test of what's truly one's in self-interest, which I would agree with. Of course, it fits in with what we said before, and the concept implicit in Rand's position, as I understand it, that reason can somehow be the sole source of knowing what's in your interest. And not just that which verifies whether my irrational, I would say irrational, not irrational, what my irrational desires, are they truly in my self-interest or not? I use reason to determine that. But reason cannot produce desires and wants. Reason is a means of analysis and of testing, as the word was used here before. I think that you found this historically. If you read Barbara Brandon's book, The Passion of Ayn Rand, you see how this played itself out in Rand's own life. Barbara Brandon was very bothered by the fact that she liked the novels of Thomas Wolfe, but she was utterly incapable of rationally explaining why she liked the novels, and therefore she's put in a position of feeling guilty, like we hear about Catholic guilt or Jewish guilt. There's an objectivist guilt here about liking something that you cannot articulate why you should like it rationally.
There are, I think, one important distinction to be made, however, are those things that can be certainly consonant with your interests. Certainly consonant with your well-being and happiness, such as, say, liking Thomas Wolfe. There's certainly nothing destructive or harmful in any of that, and reason would say, to the extent that you have interests and desires that are not harmful, that are not hampering you in any way, harming your long-term interest, your long-term goals, and so forth, fine. Indulge those kinds of things, but it would not say, and I agree with you, that reason can't produce those desires by any kind of a direct act, but nonetheless, it can serve as a test. For example, there are probably any number of things that people can do with their lives. Taking drugs, for example. You can get your momentary high or your momentary pleasure from hallucinogenic drugs. Are these things to your long-term self-interest? Are steroids to the long-term interest of a bodybuilder? Things of that nature. And there is an objective, rational determination to be made about those kinds of things. So within the realm of what I would say is rationally permissible, I don't think any objectivist would have a dispute that there's a vast range of personal preferences that could be indulged.
I was intrigued by your list of self-interests in your first part of the answer. The building of a home and taking care of the hunger and clothing. All of those within Judaism are given to the half of the yin-yang that we call the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination, which has always been a terrible translation in my mind. But it's to be distinguished with the Yetzer Tov, the good inclination, to follow God's commandments, to treat other people kindly and do all the things we're supposed to do as good Jews and good human beings. And all of these other things that are given over to the so-called evil inclination are the basic animal instincts of self-interest, the things that we have to do to survive. And to hear you come up with exactly that same list.
Sure. And
I've always hated the translation evil, but it's clearly it's the dichotomy with good, and there isn't a better way of expressing it in shorthand.
See, we'd find our own notion of the good precisely in those creative pursuits that further and enhance human life, well-being, and happiness over the long term. And so those very things that you, well, at least in this example, that you would have characterized, or not you characterizing them because you reject that, but that would be characterized as evil, we would say are the essence of goodness. The exercise, how did the ancient Greeks put it? The exercise of vital powers along lines of excellence and a life affording them scope, I think, was a definition of happiness. And we believe reason is the way to get to that.
Well, so then would you say that selfless service to others or selfless sacrifice is not in contradiction with rational self-interest, reason, or revelation?
Well, I would say it would be contradictory to reason and self-interest. I don't know how you could come up with an intelligible meaning for selfless sacrifice that would be consonant with the idea of a self-interested philosophy, which is what objectivism endorses. We have to be very careful in interpreting, certainly when interpreting Rand, and she's been vastly misinterpreted. as opposing charity. You can read her own letters, private letters to people, in which she was an extremely giving person and was very charitable in her personal life. It is not necessarily the case that a gift or charity is selfless. Is there nothing that we gain from the happiness of other people, particularly deserving people who were, say, victims of circumstance through no fault of their own, or people who mean something to us in our personal lives? Giving to people like that is certainly not selfless, and it's not a sacrifice. It would become a sacrifice if we were to give out of a sense of blind duty to anyone, no matter whether they deserved it or not, or whether they were a good person or not. And that is where objectivism would part company from any tradition that said, yes, you give no matter what.
Dr. Ahmad, what's the Islamic view on selfless sacrifice? Is it in contradiction with self-interest?
Well, I think this is one of those areas where, reason makes a very strong statement. To talk about selfless sacrifice and self-interest as anyway being coherent seems to be a self-contradiction. I think that the issue here is to understand what the word sacrifice means. It is in no terms selfless. You look at all the great writings of certainly the monotheistic religions, but I think all religions. What they're pointing to is what is in your self-interest. The Quran is saying, it is in that your interests are not simply having food and warmth, because those are things that you share with the animals. Every living being wants these things. What's unique about human beings is that we are rational and volitional. And it appeals to our ability to make proper use of those powers that are unique to us. And how does it do that? It says that clearly, when the Quran speaks about paradise or hellfire, those are teleological statements that, whether you take them literally or metaphorically, mean the same thing. What is in your long-term best interests? Now, so let's take the selfless out of it. That has no place in it. Now let's talk about sacrifice. Here I think one has to properly understand what the word sacrifice means. And this is where I think it was one of the biggest mistakes that Ayn Rand makes. She defines sacrifice in a way that most people don't use the term. She says sacrifice is where you trade a greater value for a lesser value. And I don't think that that's what the monotheistic traditions talk about when they talk about sacrifice. In the Jewish and Muslim traditions, the quintessential sacrifice is Abraham's sacrifice. What was Abraham going to sacrifice? His son. What is his son? His son is a great value to any human being. Their son is a huge, important, major value. What did he want to sacrifice it for? His God. A greater value. So that the concept of sacrifice is when you trade something that means a lot to you for something that means even more. To trade what means a lot for a lesser value is something that the Jewish and Muslim traditions definitely do not approve of. That would be someone who trades in God or God's revelation for material well-being. That would be a sorry trade. In fact, the Quran says that would not be a profitable exchange.
I will shock you by agreeing that Rand's use of the term sacrifice was unconventional, and that where she was talking, I think she was talking probably almost in the Kantian sense, where it was really, you gain nothing out of the act, but you do it out of a sense of sheer duty. And that there is no sense of values, but you do it because you must, because there is some sort of a categorical imperative for you to do it. And I think a fair argument can be made that it was probably not appropriate to appropriate that term and use it in that way. But what she was driving at was, I think, the more of the Kantian type of view, and not... certainly when we talk about sacrifice on the battlefield, the soldier sacrificing on the battlefield or something, is he giving up a higher value for a lower one or something? No, he's not. He has a notion of a very high value, and that for him life is no longer worth living if his country is not free, or if his or if his buddies are killed, and he has his loyalty and commitment to them and so forth. So. Yes, it was an unconventional usage of the term sacrifice, and it's led to a little bit of mischief, I think, in terms of dialogue and interpretation.
No doubt.
Rabbi, I wanted to ask you, Rand says that a fundamental conflict exists between what God wants and what humans naturally want. So religious ethics will make fundamental the principle that human wants should be sacrificed for God's, which gets back to what we've just been talking
Absolutely.
about. So is there a fundamental conflict between the command of God and what humans want?
I think to a certain degree that's what the whole story of the attempt to get Abraham to sacrifice Isaac is getting at. And the fact that from the earliest times, the interpretation of why that story is in the book of Genesis is to teach us that this is exactly what God doesn't want, to help us to alleviate that conflict by saying, you don't have to worry about it. God, even though God transcends rationality, we had to create a word in the 19th century, late 19th century, to explain the non-rational side of God in a rationalist discussion. And they came up with the word numinous, playing off of the idea of light and luminosity, and nomen from name, to describe that part of God which cannot be apprehended by reason. We don't have to worry about that, is what this story, I think, has been telling Jews for 3,000 years or so. God's not going to make that irrational claim on us and expect us to be able to deal with it. The story begins, God decided to test Abraham, which, if you interpret it in the way that most people do to try and make sense out of it, says God didn't really intend for this to happen. God wanted to see what Abraham's response would be. And there's a wonderful modern interpretation of that simply says Abraham failed. The correct answer was God said it, do it. He didn't, God wanted Abraham to say no. He went and did it. You're out. And there's something simplistically beautiful about that interpretation. And it comes from, of all places, the ultra-Orthodox.
Interesting. Dr. Ahmad, what's your, is that similar to what
Well, I think that, but in the case of Islam, I think it's rather agreed upon that the point was, to test of Abraham was which is the higher value. But the fact that there is no conflict was with God's revelation, the second part, the other shoe. Right. Well, in the Quranic version of the story, when Abraham is ready to do the sacrifice, and by the way, when his son is ready to make the sacrifice also, because in the Quranic version, he's asked his opinion, and he says, oh yes, whatever God wants, I want too. At that moment, the angel comes and says, you've already fulfilled the vision.
Interesting.
You've done it. It's over. You passed the test. You don't have. You should not kill him. Kill a ram instead.
Well, this has been a very interesting conversation. Fortunately, our time is already up, which I can't believe. But if you want to drop us a line or you want to know more about the Scholars Chair, go to scholarschair.com. I am Sarah Swick. Good night.
تعلموا فاجعل من دون ذلك فتحا قريبا هو الذي أرسل رسولا